No, I was just saying, I tend to agree with the GPL 3 versus the GPL2 in that regard, and that, yeah, you can't put an internet backdoor close. Oh, it's all open source, but if our server doesn't ping you back, you're screwed. I'm all for that, but I still think the GPL isn't perfect. The problem with it right now is like what happened with iOS, and I want a clause in there that basically states, okay, to comply with the terms of an external marketplace, you are allowed to put DRM or closed sourcing on. However, identical source code must be accessible, and there must be an open hook for configuring and doing modification. Basically, you have to build in a way to comply with marketplaces like iTunes while still protecting the open source. That is, you think the legal soup of the GPL now is complex? The legal soup of that, which basically saying you can close source it.
Well, I mean, you could already do that with you could already do that with the Android marketplace control the GPL. You could already do that with the Android marketplace. I mean, it still makes money. It's just, all you have to do is just give them an option to change, to install the application, and make changes to it and install those changes. And you could do that with the Android marketplace as long as you just...
No. You can do it with...
Okay, I realize it's not safe to... Yeah.
No, that's the thing. The problem is because iOS doesn't have that, okay, I'm going to go outside the official marketplace legally. I realize it's legal in the terms that it's not illegal to jailbreak your phone, but Apple clearly doesn't want you doing it. There's this whole cat and mouse. The reality is a very easy way for Apple to keep open source stuff off of the iOS platform is to just like the way whole bunches of open source stuff got pulled from the iOS store. Hey, wait a minute. The GPL says this can't have DRM, and everything in the iOS marketplace has to have DRM. Pull our competition out.
Well, here's the thing. You can have your application in the GPL store if you get consent from the people who write the application. You're allowed to give... the GPL allows for you to make exceptions. Obviously, the VLC people didn't want that, so that wouldn't be in there anyway. If I wrote an application and I wanted to put it in the iOS store, I can make an exception specifically for the iOS store in my application, and then it still complies with the GPL.
Well, yes, but here's the thing. Part of the whole free software versus open source thing is that more people than just the person who originally wrote it have... they have the ability to take this open source free thing and adapt it and redistribute it. But they have to comply with the GPL under which it was distributed. That's an obvious break in the chain of custody in which you're giving draconian absolute control authority to one tiny little group. Again, this is where my practicality versus the open source versus free software starts having a contradiction. Because I'm like, okay, I understand the utopian ideal. I do. But the reality is, it's one of those best of intentions creating the exact problem you're trying to fight, giving one tiny little small person... I don't think it's a big problem. No. And the reality is, it's not a big problem right now. The places where it's a problem right now are things like the iOS marketplace. Like you said, Android has a loop around to get around it. Phone 7... There's nothing that makes the phone... That's an easy thing to add. Apple could add it. It's just... But that's the thing. I don't think Apple's ever going to add that. I agree with you. I think they should. Then
why should they get to use any GPL stuff?
No, but that's...
Android's already going to take iOS over.
That's the problem. I'm not worried about it hurting... I'm not worried about it hurting Apple or iOS, which I think it does. My concern is the end result is it's a... Well, no, but my concern is as a result of this oversight, there's a whole mess of tools which should be available to the end user, which because of a legal oversight aren't. The person being hurt here is the end user. All the end users who chose...
Just switch to Android and stop crying about it.
Well, again, yeah, it's like the open source fanboy in me wants to go, well, yeah, that's your fault for supporting that platform. But
you know, plenty of other devices allow you to install from other sources. I remember the original Windows phones let you install from any source you want. You didn't have to use an app store. In fact, that's the only way to get applications. So even those could use open source applications. Apple's way of doing it, I don't think should be able to use GPL because it's just a horrible way of doing things.
But at the end of the day, I don't think the users who chose to go with iOS should be penalized for Apple's stupidity. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, if the legal hoopla here is preventing the end user from doing something that they should be able to do, it's take a look at the legal hoopla. I don't know where you stand on that, Jordan.
Missed part of that.
We were talking about GPL2 versus GPL3, and we both agree that the GPL3, the no net backdoor, the clause that basically says you can't have an internet backdoor is good. But my personal opinion is the GPL3 still falls short because it doesn't address which, in my opinion, is going to be an ever-increasing problem with proprietary platforms like Windows 8, OS 10.7, iOS, and so on, where they're putting these marketplaces into them, which are clearly built on proprietary standards and everything else. And it's just, these marketplaces are going to become more and more predominant. And the GPL needs to figure out a way to be compatible with marketplaces that try and get overzealous, so that open technology is not, so that the GPL does not become a backdoor way to keep open technology as a non-option for the end user if they went with platform XYZ.
I was arguing that it shouldn't need that exception because the way that iOS has applications only controlled by one source and you cannot get it through other sources. You can't have a marketplace that supports GPL stuff. The Android marketplace does support that. It complies with the GPL. It doesn't, it still makes money. You can still have your applications on there. It's no less safe than the Apple one, but it supports the GPL with how it works. It lets you install stuff from other sources if you set that option. So I don't think that the GPL should be changed. I just think that, people are already saying Android is going to, overtake the rest of the phones, and I believe that. So I think that other companies will change and allow for people to change their, I think that they will change their marketplace to allow GPL applications, if nothing else, to see that Android's working so well, and so they may do it without knowing it and become GPL compliant. I don't think that the GPL should change to allow being controlled by one company at distributing only they can distribute applications.
No. I'm not saying they should change to allow sign. I'm saying they should make a clause which creates an exception for that particular situation. I agree with you. The ideal solution is Apple grows up and understands that everybody does not do things the I way. But we're talking about Apple here. If it was Microsoft, I'd be with you. I'd be like, as soon as the wind changes enough, Microsoft at the end of the day always sees common sense. Microsoft goes, okay, we lost this one. Let's figure out how to make ourselves still necessary or relevant for those who buy our marketing. Microsoft always concedes that point when it comes to that point. Apple, on the other hand, hi, the sky has fallen, I've blown up, and I'm dead. I'm still in charge. Apple never sees light in that. That's,
I don't know. I mean, Apple, the operating system for the desktop includes GPL applications on it, and it includes Emacs.
For now.
Every Apple computer
for now. And we're getting into an iWorld concern here. My desperate concern here is that going forward, and if Apple can get away with it, Microsoft will follow in suit. If the end user will put up with it from Apple, Microsoft will try it too. That this iOS, because basically this is, right now iOS has paved the way to show, hey, if we did make this part of the terms of service, we have made all this open source stuff that's our direct competition that we can't really compete with against the terms of service. And they'll be able to ride that for 5 to 10 years until the congressional investigation goes, wait a minute. Because that doesn't happen overnight.
I think it's not just that. I think you're forgetting about, I think you're forgetting about the big players like Amazon in the alternative market who are going to be big and, who they're going to be missing out on, Amazon's huge and they're going to be missing out on all the apps that are going to get submitted there because those are going to work across all Android devices everywhere that supports them. And, Android, as it overtakes iPhone, people are just going to start submitting it there, and then Amazon will come to at least Microsoft and say, hey, would you like our App Store, capabilities on your computer? And I think that, that deal may be made, and then it would be just, I think that people will change to allow a more open App Store because that just is more powerful.
You bring up an interesting point there. I can't remember the name of it. You brought it up a few weeks ago, Jordan. There's the Ubuntu App Store, but then there's that alternative to it that's not focused purely on Ubuntu, but it's trying to become platform or distro agnostic.
I haven't heard a word out of that in a while.
Okay. No, it's like what I would love to honestly see is not only a distro agnostic marketplace like that, but a platform agnostic one like that. Just purely open. You upload the binaries to us, and whether they're on OS 10, Windows, or some Linux distro, we'll do the intermediary work of just getting your product out there. And that is desperately needed.
In the end, my opinion is I don't think the GPL needs this clause. Jordan?
Welcome to the core of open source versus free software.
Yeah.
Is that a non-vote?
If I remember correctly, the old argument as far as having GPL software in the Apple Store specifically was all the DRM behind it, not necessarily the distribution of source, right?
Yes, and that they're not allowed to put a DRM layer on top of it, which is by proxy how the iOS store in its entirety works. If it's in that marketplace, there's a DRM wrapper on it. And I'd love to see a clause in there that says, if it's through no fault of your own, if you're uploading it to a marketplace that you have absolutely no control over, some other company has done something you can't make them not do, you have to do this to allow the source, to allow everything to still be fully accessible externally, but you have no control over that company. That's like saying my video can't be on YouTube because YouTube uses the Flash format and we only support the whatever standard. I don't have any control over what format Google turns it into. I did my part and I sent it up there. I didn't do anything wrong. Now, James is right.
Of course, there's always that option of distributing it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
All that's hurting is the end user.
Exactly. That's my and at the end of the day, it's a philosophy disagreement because James is right to not want it because that clause could easily be abused. All I do is create a company that's in no way legally attached to me, whose sole job is to create something I have no control over. It's which I could see companies doing. And I was like, well, we're Corporation XYZ. We have nothing to do with this other corporation that our founder's cousin started, and they are creating the problem. So,
if you allow the through no fault of your own clause, it pretty much takes away.
It creates a backdoor for abuse.
The GPL is not powerful at all because the GPL at heart lets people do stuff with your code that you made on intent. So that through no fault of your own clause, I could take it and I could distribute it under DRM, even though Jordan wrote the code, and then even though it would be technically because of that clause, then I could
Well, no. See, that's the thing. I did not. I am not saying this would be an easy clause to write, because what you're saying is you'd have to sit there.
You have to write in specifically Apple or Windows OS store.
Yeah, but open-ended enough so that if something changes, you can make an addendum with. Addendum is even slightly misworded, it creates the mother of all loopholes.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking that the clause that the GPL already has in it to allow that stuff is fine. I know that if you use other people's code, then it doesn't necessarily apply, but most of these apps are like written by one kid in college, so it's going to be his own code. Even if he GPLs it, he could make the clause for the App Store because that's already in the GPL.
Well, no, it's not that the GPL doesn't allow you to use proprietary code with it. There is absolutely nothing whatsoever to take me from taking a GPL thing, using it as a core to build something else, as long as that core stays open and accessible. All the proprietary layers on top of it can be proprietary, copyrighted, signed, everything else, as long as this, the piece that was originally GPL, stays GPL. Microsoft could rip everything off of Linux, build it in this nice core into Windows, reverse engineer the live CD technology. The fact that they do that isn't anything wrong with that. If they try and close source it and act like they invented it, that's where they get in trouble.
See, that's the thing. As long as you're the copyright owner, I could allow it in the iOS store. I could write an app, make it GPL, and then I could allow it in the iOS store and just include a clause, which is what makes that, And the thing is that the argument against my way of doing things is that it wouldn't allow people who make apps, who change apps to allow them to work on this new platform. But the thing is, it wouldn't work anyway because people would have to update their license, and I don't think most people would do that more than they would give, the permission from the copyright holders. If they're going to update their app, they'll probably just do the safer things and just give direct permission for a single exception from the copyright. I mean, because to change the license of the app, you still have to get permission from all the copyright holders anyway.
Yeah, no, I know. Legacy-wise, this is going to be a problem for a decade. I wish there was a way to redraft it so going forward, anything that gets released under GPL from okay, we've solved the problem, so going forward, everything's good. Everybody who's backwards and retroactive, you have to decide if you're going to join the going forward compatibility or not. Anything before is going to be a pain in the... Yeah, no.
If that's, but if, in my opinion, if that is compatibility, I don't want to go forward that way. I'd rather people just make marketplaces that allow you to make your own apps and install them. I can't even, on an Apple device without jailbreaking, I can't even create my own app and install it without submitting it through the marketplace. That's not right.
That's the thing that honestly drives me so nuts about this particular topic. We're spending way too much time talking about Apple here, but it's that they let developers do this. Essentially all this is, all they need to do is add the developer toggle mode for end users. Basically, yes, I understand this is not supported, and if I fuck my device up, you're just going to tell iOS to erase everything I've done and I'm going to lose everything. I get it. But they should have that right.
I would agree.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't think that we need to change that way. I think that the people who are doing that need to change, because honestly, the percentage of markets right now, I know it's a scary future, the percentage of markets right now is only iOS that's doing that. I don't know how the Windows Phone market is, but I know that
now
versions of Windows Phones allowed you to get apps from other sources.
For now,
right now,
I think if they think they can get away with it, if the majority of the end user will put up with it, and the majority of the end user will, I think OS 10.8, whatever cat they call it, and Windows 8 marketplace is going to have a very like this thing. The real teller isn't going to be if Apple tries it. It's going to be if Microsoft tries to join this, because Windows has enough market share that where it drags and knocks over the head in clubs and the industry, it can be drugged and list as far as end user. They have a real hard time doing that in other sectors, and I
mean, Microsoft is a company that would rather have people pirate their product than use Linux.
Anyways,
Microsoft is a company that would rather have people pirate their product to use.
Oh, I know.
That they would rather people be able to install from other sources than switch to a different thing.
Jordan, you want to add a final? You want to add a final vote on this before we move on, or just move on?
I'm good to move on.